There we go. Hey, y'all. Welcome into another LSU game day live chat. Hopefully, my internet holds up. I seem to be lagging a little bit. Thanks for diving in, anyone who chose to do so. We didn't get to do this last week because the LSU Florida game was postponed due to COVID within the Florida program. They're not playing again this week, but LSU is. We have some photos going on to my right on this cover. I just hop quick and a quick look at this by Creed and Creed. With much for helping us get this out to you. If you have comments about the game today, drop them into whatever feed you're watching on, and I'll see if I can get to them. But first things first, we do need to talk about the quarterback situation for LSU, which today will be kind of interesting because it's going to be one or maybe two players you have not ever seen throw a pass in an LSU uniform, at least during a game, which is TJ Finley or Max Johnson. Because Miles Brennan, he's suffering from a rib injury of some kind. He suffered it on that hit he took, the questionable hit he took against Missouri 2 weeks ago in that LSU loss. And he would not have played last week. He's not playing this week. It's tough to say what we're going to be looking at for LSU going forward. But for at least today, there will be a true freshman at quarterback. And it's going to be interesting to see how he does. TJ Finley's going to get the start. Ed Orgeron said that it was a toss-up basically all week in practice, but TJ Finley he had the inside track. And but you'll probably see Max Johnson today at some point. He's the son of former Super Bowl champion Brad Johnson. If you remember Brad Johnson, he won a Super Bowl with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They played the Raiders. And he's actually the nephew of Mark Richt. If you remember Mark Richt, he was the coach for the Georgia Bulldogs for a while, and then he went over to Miami. That's his uncle. So he has some college football or some football lineage to go back to. It'll be interesting to see if he gets in there today, because if he does, that means that LSU will have to accommodate a left-handed quarterback, which is kind of strange when you try to switch from a right-handed quarterback to a left-handed quarterback. It's not as simple as it might seem, because the reason you put a heavy emphasis on your left tackle is because that's the blindside tackle. That's the important tackle to make sure that you're keeping the quarterback alive, because a rush from that side is going to hit him in the back, and it's not going to be great. So if you throw a left-handed quarterback into the equation, then all of a sudden everything flips. All the responsibilities get flipped, and your right tackle becomes the blindside quarterback or blindside protector. And that's not always as easy as you'd think to flip that responsibility. You flip the play designs a lot of the time. You flip the bootlegs, and going back and forth between those guys. I think Max Johnson is more of a scrambler, based on what you've heard from Edo, kind of talking about that situation. Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see if they do decide to go to that kind of platoon system, how it looks, because LSU's offensive line, very good last year, a bit of a question mark so far. It definitely has not held up as well as you'd have hoped to see. And throwing in a new quarterback, they don't necessarily know his tendencies. They don't know what he's going to try to do. If he's trying to scramble fast earlier, you gotta trust the tackles to play with that in mind. So it'll be interesting to see. We got one question: what time's the game? What network? The game kicks off at 6 p.m. It's a kind of a weird start time, but it will be on ESPN, not SEC Network, on the traditional ESPN, which you can also get if you have an ESPN subscription. You can all get that on Watch ESPN or whatever app you use to stream. It'll be available there. Let's see. I do want to. LSU is the favorite in this game, and it's going to be interesting to see if the odds makers are giving them a little too much credit. They do have 2 weeks to kind of get back into fighting shape after a really tough loss at Missouri. If it was a while ago, so let's remind you, they had a chance to win that game at the buzzer. They had 1st and goal from the 1-yard line after a Terrace Marshall catch. You see the picture of it actually right there. And they got stopped 4 times. It's it's a really deflating way to kind of lose the momentum in a season that has already kind of been a struggle with coronavirus, with people opting out, and now they have to bounce back. And I think, if you asked the program, if you asked the players, they probably would tell you, they probably wouldn't say this, but I think that it was a very beneficial thing to not have a game last week for this team. This team really needed to kind of have a come to Jesus moment and reassess, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And being without Brennan is obviously not helpful, but more than anything else, they just needed a week, I think, to lick their wounds and kind of just figure out who they are as a program, which right now is a bad defensive team. They can't stop the run. They can't run the ball. It's everything that you grew to know about LSU is gone right now, and all of a sudden they are this high flying offensive system that cannot seem to play smash mouth football, which has always been kind of the bread and butter of LSU. And it just hasn't been. It hasn't been so far this season. We're going to take a quick break and get a word from our sponsor, Creed and Creed. And we'll be back in about 30 seconds. We'll try to get to some questions if you have them. But here you go.
This is not a dramatization or a paid testimonial. I'm Christian Creed, and let me tell you, car wrecks can wreck lives. As a former insurance adjuster and as a licensed accident investigator, I've handled hundreds of accident claims. If you or a loved one have been involved in a car accident, no matter how big or small, let me put my experience to work for you. Call Creed and Creed. We're serious attorneys for serious injuries.
All right, welcome back. Thanks to anyone checking this out. If you have a question or a comment, please throw it in the comments, and I'd like to get to them. Otherwise, we're going to go through a few key points to watch today. We already talked about the quarterback situation, but I think, and we mentioned the defense, and I think the defense is going to be a big part of whether this LSU team can turn around their season, even with a backup quarterback, even with TJ Finley or Max Johnson, whoever it is. Just if they can't stop the run, if they can't hold up in pass protection, if they continue to break down in the secondary, it doesn't really matter what they do today against South Carolina, because they're not going to be competitive when they get to play Alabama, when they get to play Florida, whenever I think that's going to happen in week 12 now. But they have Auburn coming up. They have really tough SEC games the rest of the way, and they cannot afford to be giving up 40 points a game. That's just not a scenario that puts you out on top. It doesn't matter how good Terrace Marshall is. It doesn't matter how many touchdowns he catches, and he's on pace to catch a record number of touchdown passes. They just won't be in this conversation. And just believe it or not, 1-2 is not a death sentence. You've already seen, other than Alabama, Alabama probably need to stumble a bit, and LSU would probably need to win that game, which at this point seems unlikely. But Auburn's 2-2. Florida is 2-1. Florida had a really loss to I want to say A&M. And so you look at a really open SEC outside of Alabama kind of leading that pack, and you just need to put yourself in that conversation. So when Alabama does come to town, you give yourself a chance. You can't go 1-3. 1-3 would be a death sentence with losses to the easy opponents, the quote unquote easy opponents in Mississippi State, Missouri. Now you have South Carolina, who beat Auburn last week. So this is going to be the real question mark game where it's like, are you going to be a serious contender in the SEC? Because this is the game you need to prove it. Auburn is coming off a really good win. South Carolina is coming up a really good win. They have a lot of positive momentum. And if LSU can show up and really assert themselves and have these young players kind of play like they understand what they're supposed to be doing, right? Then maybe there's a chance to salvage this season in terms of giving Alabama a run for their money. And for what we see right now, it doesn't feel that way. Our esteemed panelists, our beat reporters, they're not quite as confident as the odds makers who are giving LSU the points in this game. Brooks Cabina, one of our beat writers, projects South Carolina to win 31-24. And while I'm doing this, why don't y'all give me your score predictions for today? Because I am curious. I'd like to hear a poll of the people listening and see how confident they feel in terms of this game, because I think it's interesting. South Carolina, as they have a really tough-nosed coach in Will Muschamp. He understands how to play these big, these kind of smash mouth games. So Brooks doesn't think the LSU is going to win today. Scott Rabelais is a little more confident. He has LSU coming out 31-26. But he says he's not sure when he's been more conflicted about an LSU pick. And I think that's fair. Wilson Alexander, another of our writers, has South Carolina winning 28-24. And Sheldon Mickles, another beat writer of ours, has LSU winning 27-20. He thinks LSU is going to rely on the running game to take pressure off the two young quarterbacks, and the offense will do just enough as the defense rebounds somewhat. And holding South Carolina to 20 points would be a rebound, and that's the scary part. So yeah, and I think they bring up a good point. And Greg Hardy here asks a very, very poignant question: why can't we run the ball? And that is a very good question, considering this is a team that came into the season kind of talking about, how the running game is going to be one of the strengths. You have three really good runners that you can, kind of roll the hot hand with, and Chris Curry, John Emery, top recruit in the nation, and Ty Davis Price, who I'd argue has been the best of those three, but still you have a really inconsistent looking rushing attack behind a new offensive line that has struggled in pass protection and hasn't opened up many holes in the run game. They haven't, especially against a team like Missouri that's traditionally going to be undersized. And, they were missing a lot of key offensive or defensive players due to COVID issues. And LSU just really, they ran the ball a bit early in the second half. They kind of asserted the ground game on that first drive that got into the end zone. But otherwise, they just didn't. They relied a lot on Terrace Marshall, and he delivered a lot of the time. But, they got beaten in the time of possession. And their defense was on the field way too long in that game. And that was the same thing you saw against Mississippi State, where the time of possession was so lopsided that by the end of the game, LSU's defense is not good right now. And throwing a suspect defense on the field in the second half and knowing they're exhausted is just a recipe for disaster when you've already come to see that even like fundamentally they're having some issues. And when you throw just exhaustion into the mix, you don't have a guy like Grant Delpit to kind of just settle everyone down and get them in that zone. Jacoby Stevens is a really solid player, but they just on other areas of the defense, they just don't have that. Kenneth Falk says can't run because no real experienced running backs and a weaker offensive line. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I mean, how often it's not like you have any true freshmen out here. All of these guys were on the team last year. All of these guys sat behind Clyde Edwards-Helaire and kind of learned the ropes. As a sophomore running back, you should be able to contribute. It shouldn't be an issue of not understanding the system, of not understanding your responsibilities. There's three second or third year guys in that system, and there's no excuse for them not knowing what they're doing, and that should not be if that's the reason that you're not running the ball effectively, then that's on the coaching. That's on these guys not being ready, and maybe that is the case, but I do think that it's more of a commitment issue in terms of the play calling, and you just need to see them get a little more creative with how they're getting these guys the ball. You'd like to see a little more RPO action. I think you will with some of these younger guys, because it kind of takes the stress level off of the decision making in the pass game. You're giving them quick reads, you're giving them an out. If the defense is showing something they don't think that the offense can block, they can hand the ball off. You don't want to see a guy like TJ Finley being asked to sit back in the pocket for an extended period of time. And you don't want to see a guy like Max Johnson being forced to scramble as the offensive, the blocking on offense is not there. So I do think you're going to see a commitment to the running game today, for better or worse. And this is the week to do it. You need to prove that you can run the ball, and you need to prove it in a game that's not Auburn. You need to go into the Auburn game feeling good about your running situation, and we'll see. I think that it's going to be interesting to see how the quarterback, or whatever quarterback's in there. I think TJ Finley's going to get a lot of the run. It's going to be interesting to see how early and often they look at Terrace Marshall. This might be a situation where you just find him. You just call plays with the expectation that he's going to be the guy, and you give him a chance to make plays. And I think more often than not, that's the best offensive game plan you can have, is just tell the young guys, look for Terrace, and if not, check it down. I think Eric Gilbert is a really good player, and he's going to be. I think that he's going to be a big influence on this team getting to where it needs to be in terms of being a competitive team in this conference. And I don't think they're going to be that without him. But and John Trey Kirkland's another guy who I think is a really big part of this offense. But with a true freshman quarterback, you don't want to be asking him to make 2-3 reads on a play. You're going to want him to get the ball out of his hands quickly, or just take the safe throw. The only, the biggest reason that South Carolina, I'm sorry, I'm stuttering a little bit. The biggest reason South Carolina upset Auburn last week was because they got turnovers. Will Muschamp has always been a defensive-minded coach, and if LSU can take care of the ball and assert itself on the ground, they should be able to control this game. South Carolina is not going to take 5 drives 80 yards down the field. If you control field position, control time of possession, and don't turn the ball over, LSU should win this game. And I think that's when you see the betting line and you see that Miles Brennan being out didn't really have that much of an impact on it. I think that's why, because LSU has all of the tools to win this game convincingly. They just have to execute. Derek Stingley has to play like Derek Stingley. LSU has to not allow a guy to run by himself 50 yards down the field, which is what happened against Missouri. Michael Wilson literally took a release upfield and no one was there. You can't do that. You can't fall for flea flickers on the first drive of the game. You have to be prepared. You have to execute. And I think that with 2 weeks to do that, you're going to see a much better and much more fundamentally sound LSU football team. We aren't getting any questions, so I'm going to cut this off. I appreciate anyone who took the time to dive in here and listen to me ramble. And we got about 43 minutes before LSU kicks off against South Carolina. Again, that's on ESPN, 6 p.m. Central Time. Thanks again to our sponsors, Creed and Creed. And let's see what happens. Peace, y'all.